Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Global Environmental Justice Conference and attending this panel session on equitable humanitarian aid. I'd like to hand it over to our moderator, Kevin Brown.
Thank you, Madeline, and good morning and welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you've joined today's session, both virtually and in person, responding to climate change with equitable humanitarian assistance, where we will explore how to address climate change within the humanitarian context. Again, good morning. I'm Kevin Brown, the Deputy Office Director of USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance Office, the Humanitarian Assistance Office of Technical and Programmatic Quality. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. We're really excited and look forward to audience participation. So before we get started, I just have a few quick housekeeping notes for everyone to remember when we reach the Q&A portion. For those of you that are physically in the audience, we have support staff that will assist with your questions. But for those who are joining us virtually, please be sure to put comments and questions in the Q&A chat, and we will respond to those during the Q&A session. Just a few words on climate change. Climate change continues to intensify humanitarian crises. Natural disasters have nearly doubled in the past 20 years, with at least 7,348 major disasters occurring between the years 2000 and 2019. This has claimed 1.23 million lives and affected over 4 billion people worldwide. Though climate change affects us all, its impact isn't equitable. Indigenous and local communities have contributed to the least to the climate crisis. However, they suffer the most from climate-related disasters. Policies and programs do not consider or reflect the needs of these communities, and in some cases may increase their vulnerability to climate risks and other stressors. Further, access to climate finance for adaptation remains unbalanced, with the majority of climate finance being directed toward mitigation. Adaptation financing is insufficient and does not prioritize countries that are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. For instance, in 2019, the top 15 most vulnerable countries received less than 6% of global adaptation financing. To address these challenges, humanitarian efforts must be adaptable, equitable, and inclusive to ensure that actions respond to social inequities and the needs of those affected by climate-related disasters. Climate adaptation and disaster risk must account for and address root causes of vulnerabilities, including systemic inequalities and social injustices. Humanitarian actions must be guided by the leadership and experience of local actors and communities. Women, persons living with disabilities, youth, indigenous peoples, all are powerful and knowledgeable agents of change. And by integrating diverse perspectives and meaningfully partnering with local actors, we can develop effective solutions that are tailored, context appropriate, and achieve climate goals. Through its Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, or BHA, USAID does just that. As the lead coordinator for the US government's disaster assistance efforts overseas, BHA reaches millions of people around the world with life-saving aid. We take a holistic look at humanitarian aid, providing assistance before, during, and after a crisis, from readiness and response to relief, recovery, and rebuilding. And not only do we save lives immediately following a disaster, we also help people move beyond crises by creating a strong platform for linking humanitarian assistance to long-term development, helping communities become more resilient to future crises. Now, today, we will hear from two leaders in their respective fields of discipline on how equitable and inclusive humanitarian assistance and disaster risk response is central to our global response to the climate crisis. I first want to welcome Mr. Adessou Kossivi. Mr. Kossivi is a strong advocate of shifting power from the international system to community-led capacities, preparedness, and response facilitated by the local organizations. He serves as the regional coordinator of West, Central, and North Africa and West Asia of Global Network of Civil Society Organization for Disaster Reduction, GNDR, and this is the largest international network of civil society organizations working together to strengthen the resilience of communities most at risk of disasters. He is also the current elected co-chair of the director board of Climate Action Network International. This global network of more than 1,800 civil society organizations works in over 130 countries, driving collective and sustainable action to fight the climate crisis and to achieve social and racial justice. I also want to welcome Ms. Marcie Roth. Ms. Roth is an expert on whole community inclusive global disaster risk reduction and climate justice. She currently serves as the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of World Institute on Disability. Prior to that, she served as a leader throughout the development and implementation of the United Nations Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030, and as a consultant to the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Ms. Roth also served as a consultant throughout the development and implementation of the UN Interagency Standing Committee guidelines on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action. Ms. Roth is featured on the Forbes 50 Over 50 Impact List, joining the ranks of many successful women, entrepreneurs, investors, creators, philanthropists, and change makers. Before I quickly turn over to our panelists, again, I just want to remind our virtual participants to add all of your questions in the chat. We will try to address those, as many of those, during the Q&A session. Thank you, and welcome again. Over to you, Mr. Kossivi.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Happy to meet you. As Kevin Brown said, my name is Kossivi Adessou. I'm happy to join you, and I hope you can hear me very well. I will share with you in 10 minutes, probably, the role of the humanitarian sector in equitably addressing the climate crisis. So this is, I hope you can see my screen. Now I can see you, so can someone confirm, please, that you can see my screen?
We cannot see your screen.
You cannot see my screen. Let me, since the morning, I was struggling a bit with this. Yeah, let me share my screen again, and can you see it now, please?
Yes, we can see it.
It's okay now. Thank you so much. So my presentation will be, this is the plan of the presentation, 3 main points to take into consideration. As we have only 10 minutes, I will make it very sharp, but I hope the essential of the message will pass through, and feel free, as Brown said, to raise your question. We'll be happy to come and provide our answer as we can. So the first question is climate change. What is that? No? We've been hearing a lot about climate change, but and our understanding can be a bit different. So I try to say that in the 21st century, this 21st century has experimented a phenomenon that has challenged every predictions, has affected any development plan, fragilized development countries, and threatening most at-risk communities and developing countries. Just to say that climate change is not a phenomenon that is threatening part of the world, but it's a global phenomenon, and we need to come together to fight the phenomenon. According to the UNFCCC, climate change is the change of climate which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activities, and which alters the composition of the global atmosphere above and beyond what will happen because of natural climate variability over a comparable period of time. This is the definition that the UNFCCC has brought on board. And again, this definition shows clearly that it's not an event that goes beyond human capacities, because human beings are quite involved in the phenomenon and are responsible, I may say, of the phenomenon to a certain stage. Of course, there is a part of natural responsibility, but still that part is very few. And if we consider only the natural part in terms of responsibility, probably we will not sit here to talk about climate change and its impact today. So what are the impact of climate change? You can see these 4 pictures. The first at the top, at the left side, is coming from Senegal. You know, I'm based in Senegal currently. And after the last year flooding, this is what the flooding has triggered, provoked as consequence to some farmers on the ground. The second picture at the top, but at the right side, is Niger. Niger is one of the driest country in the world, I may say, if not in Africa, which is experimenting a very serious hazard, climate-related hazard during this last decade, I must say. The third picture at the left side, at the down at the left side, is taken at the beach of Togo. Togo is a West Africa country between Benin and Ghana, and you can see you see those kind of tank that you are seeing are the wells where people fetch water from, which means that communities lived there before. This is the house of some people that has been, the house have gone because of the pressure of the sea, and people are obliged to flee their house and find a place elsewhere. The fourth and last picture, I took it online, but probably it's in America, where you can see the impact of the climate change on the farmers. Just to show that climate change, again, is not a regional challenge, but it's a global one, and only global actions can really contribute to tackle the phenomenon itself and reduce the vulnerabilities that are related. Now let us come back to the literature. I want also to remind you that everything I'm sharing here today is partly brought from the field. So from our different experience on the ground, from our exchange with local communities, but also with some international actors who are really involved at the community level. You can see here that climate change leads to more frequent, severe, long-lasting extreme weather events, including droughts, wildfire, heat waves, storms, such as cyclones and flood. We also note that climate change is a source of slow onset events, such as melting glacier, retreating glacier, sea level rise, ocean acidification, salinization, soil desertification, loss of biodiversity, and land and forest degradation, etc. So there are a lot of consequences that are classified as slow onset events that are climate related. Sometimes also, we note that these events happen the same time in the same location. So, and by saying this, by putting this here, we are talking about the vulnerability. So the fact of the severity, but the regularity and also the location of the event can increase the vulnerability of communities. They can overlap and occur one after another. Sometimes these events are also interrelated and exacerbated each other. So yeah, because there is a strong connection between some of the events, the vulnerability can be really, really high. In Niger especially, and this is an example from the ground, and in the Sahel region, for example, climate change is partly responsible for armed conflict, displacement internally, mainly, hunger, natural hazards such as drought, flood, heat waves, etc. in Niger. Niger, as I say, is a country in West Africa. The role of the humanitarian sector. Because of frequency, severity, and length of crisis, humanitarian actors have to be active, as climate change is responsible of slow onset and sudden onset events. Also because climate change triggers vulnerability that enhances the dependency of several individuals from external support. Also because more than 25.3 million people were obliged to flee from their house, to leave their house because of climate-related events. And this is data coming from the IDMC report of the last year. Also because number of individuals cannot feed themselves even once a day because of climate-related events. So there are people who are experiencing a difficult time because of climate change. And again, I'm thinking about the Eastern Africa, the one of Africa, where the last 4 years, the communities, people, countries have experimented drought, severe droughts, and this is leading to food insecurity in that region. how to proceed to contribute as humanitarian, how do we proceed to contribute to building the resilience to reduce the vulnerability of community because of climate change. So first of all, we think it's important to empower the capacity and the skills of most at-risk communities to develop their anti-vulnerability strategy. So there is no way you succeed to fight climate change if you don't help people to develop their own anti-vulnerability strategy or build their resilience, if you want. It's also important to invest at the local level. For those who know, in 2016, there was a global humanitarian summit in Turkey, in Istanbul, where 3 documents, including Agenda for Humanity, Grand Bargain, and the Charter for Change have been adopted. And we think these documents are still valid and need to be considered to really find a way to fight climate change. Also, we think that systematically it's important to include local communities' voice, knowledge, and reflection in any decision-making process. It's also important to put in place timely humanitarian resources that meet local actors' needs and emergency needs. We propose that we encourage humanitarian actors to develop their competency in preventive anticipatory action. Generally, humanitarian actors are there, they sit, they wait for something to happen to rescue community. We think it's important to include in the humanitarian activities anticipatory activities that can contribute to reduce the dependency and the vulnerability of the communities, and also reduce their intervention as rescuing lives. It's important to promote a risk-informed development planning or approach, which is an anticipatory approach that includes the slow onset and extreme events, extreme weather events. It's also important to develop solidarity and reinforce partnership and collaboration between the local actors, the frontliners, and international actors. So there won't be any gap between these 2 actors, but there is a need to complement each other's work on the ground to consolidate the resilience projects and the humanitarian actions. It's also important to promote more quality funding that meets some criteria, including rapidity, flexibility, and accessibility to all. Because we know generally the best time to act or to intervene as a humanitarian actor is the first week, and generally we fail to intervene at that time. And this increase the vulnerability, enhance the impact of the hazard on communities. And finally, we say it's important to promote a whole of society approach to tackle inequalities such as gender-based injustice. Yeah, because on the ground, we experimented a lot of gender-based injustice. The final note I want to share with you very quickly is to note that climate change is a super risk driver responsible of several loss and damage, which it is important to recognize first, to tackle the necessary, and to provide the necessary resources to reduce the exposure, the vulnerability, and people requesting for humanitarian support. I also say it's important to know that people in need have the same and full rights as everyone. So there is no way you treat people in need as second-hand, as second-classified people. No. The best humanitarian is the one that leads to autonomy of people in need, including displaced people. And finally, country states have the responsibility to ensure secure environment and life with dignity to all. That's very briefly my some of the ideas I've put on in this slide to share with you. Your comments are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kossivi. We really appreciate that. Now we'll just turn to Ms. Roth for her presentation.
Okay, and share screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, it looks good.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, everybody. And I want to thank our hosts for the opportunity to bring the words of the World Institute on Disability to you all as a part of this incredibly important and timely discussion. I really appreciated hearing from Adessou, and I think our comments are very much in alignment. So very briefly, the World Institute on Disability is about to celebrate our 40th anniversary. We were founded by people with disabilities, and we have been continually led by people with disabilities. This is something we're very proud of. And in fact, as a person with disability myself, it is a great honor to represent the global disability community. And when I share with you about the World Institute on Disability, our global mission is to continually advance the rights and opportunities of over 1 billion people with disabilities. We provide accessibility and universal design solutions. We work in policies, tools, and services for global community living. And we are very focused on emergency preparedness, disaster risk reduction, and climate resilience. It's not advancing. Okay, so here in the US, 1 in 4 adults has some type of disability, 26% of the US population, and globally, 15% or 1.3 billion people with disabilities across the globe. And this is probably an extreme underestimate of the numbers of people with disabilities. According to the United Nations, children and adults with disabilities and older adults are 2 to 4 times more likely to be injured or die in a disaster. And this is not because of our disabilities. This is really more because of failure to plan, to provide accessibility and accommodations. And in the Sendai framework, which was such a key first step for the Sustainable Development Goals, it was recognized that not only are persons with disabilities disproportionately affected by disasters, but crucially, that our knowledge and leadership skills are essential for building resilient, inclusive, and equitable societies. Put another way, by the World Report on Disability back in 2011, what happens to people with disabilities has a direct impact not only on them, but on the rest of society. So this is not a niche discussion. This is in fact about every community across our globe. Many folks are focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is very important, but without adding the A, D, E, I, A, accessibility, we will never achieve diversity, equity, or true inclusion. In 2019, the UN Interagency Standing Committee launched, after a whole lot of work done by a whole lot of people, guidelines on the inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action. These guidelines have a very deep and broad look at legal and policy frameworks, overarching principles, the cross-cutting topics and programming that are so needed in focusing on disability inclusive humanitarian action, everybody's roles and responsibilities. Then there are sector-specific chapters, so that each of the sectors has the information that they need. And then there are 7 annexes to provide additional information, indicators, and tools. The IASC guidelines focus on 4 must-do actions: promoting meaningful participation of persons with disabilities, removing barriers, empowering persons with disabilities, and supporting them to develop their capabilities, and disaggregating data for monitoring inclusion. And the 161-page guidelines can really be summarized by the focus on the 4 things that must happen in order for humanitarian action to be inclusive of persons with disabilities. And as we are focusing on environmental justice and the impact, the disproportionate impact of environmental justice on everyone, and that disproportionate impact on persons with disabilities, it is everyone's priority, and we will only be successful if we promote meaningful participation, remove barriers, empower and support people to develop those capacities, and disaggregate data for meaningful monitoring. Disability justice, such an important element of environmental justice, really centers intersectionalities and the ways diverse systems of oppression amplify and reinforce one another. So this is about rights, not about charity, and rights are meaningless without justice for all. We have established the Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration to connect disability-led organizations with corporate and foundation resources for immediate and sustained impact in disasters. And this is because we are experiencing consistent and sustained gaps in access to the more traditional humanitarian relief. We are currently active, for example, in the Ukraine, the Russian war on Ukraine, and we are supporting a disability-led organization in Ukraine, serving thousands and thousands of people, and are doing this without any of the traditional humanitarian relief, no government assistance, only charity, corporate, and foundation, and the donations of people worldwide. So GADRA targets local disaster relief and resilience resources, and we bring together our allies to support and accelerate assistance and resources. We, the World Institute on Disability and our Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration have a reach and capacity that is almost global. We're getting close. And in closing, I just want to point out that in our environmental justice priorities, we must bake in a commitment to resilience in the face of injustice, and true resilience will only be achievable with a full commitment to equal access, equity, and whole community inclusion. And if you'd like to learn more or contact us, here are the many ways that we can communicate with you. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the further discussion.
Thank you so much again, Ms. Roth. That was a very great and informative presentation. So now we'll move to our question and answer and discussion period. So again, if anybody online has any questions, please feel free to add those to the Q&A chat and we will touch on those. And if anyone in the audience has questions, please raise your hand. We'll have somebody reach out to you. But I'm gonna just jump it off with one question for both of you. In your presentations, you both alluded to the need to include underrepresented communities to strengthen and create local sustainable solutions. How can humanitarian actors and organizations strive for more successful disaster recovery with a particular focus on climate adaptation outcomes through a localization agenda?
Would you like me to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So this is Marcie speaking, and we in the disability community, we've had a long-standing sort of mantra, which is nothing about us without us. More recently, we have actually sort of amended that to say nothing without us. And so disaster recovery is such an important opportunity to invest in universal design, whole community inclusion, rather than building back better. We believe that it's time to build forward better.
Thank you so much, Marcie. I think you covered part of my answer, but I want to start by saying that disaster recovery is an opportunity to reshape the development model that we have today. And reshaping the development model will consist to understand who are the victims of the climate-related event and make sure that we hear from them, make sure that we give them the right skills to really challenge the threats that they face on a daily basis, and make sure that the external support is an additional support, not the main support. As far as the external support will be the main support, we will never succeed, you know? So the business model needs to change, the development model need to change, and the inclusion of the frontliners is key to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you both for that. And you're right. I mean, we do need to look at how we do business and reshift our mindset around that. But you have a follow-up question to that, and then I'll turn to the audience. You know, as we look at localization and we think about reshifting and reshaping, how can we ensure that our approaches do not recreate existing inequalities? Like, for instance, if we're working with local organizations from a dominant class versus a broader community, so on and so forth.
Thank you so much. They will come now and Marcie will cover. I just want to take you, I mean, let us see a bit what is happening actually in the Eastern Africa, okay? The droughts itself is a natural event, but the consequence of the droughts is the result or the outcome of the development mechanism we've put in place. Drought will continue to happen, and we can fight against droughts, but probably we can fight against the impact of the drought. But as far as you put in place an assisting mechanism where people wait for the external support to save them from the complexity that they understand better and that they know better, then probably we are not on the right way. Again, it's important to invite those who are concerned by the problem to provide the solution and to make sure that these people are sufficiently empowered in terms of capacity so that they can, and they have the resources available. Remember, when I was presenting, I talked about rapid, accessible, and flexible resources. once we can achieve this mechanism, people can be sure that once we have a problem, we may have the knowledge, but not the resources. We know where the money is, we know how the funds are, and we can go and have the adequate resources to tackle the problem we are dealing with. Probably the situation will change. Thank you.
And this is Marcie, and I will jump in, and I agree with everything Adessou said. And I will add, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley says it better than I could. She says the people closest to the pain should be the people closest to the power. And I think we need to ask ourselves, are we waiving an opportunity to come to the table because it's a fashionable thing to do? Or are we really leveling those opportunities so that the people who've had the most lived experience are the ones who really can influence what happens next? We're certainly talking about it much more than we ever have before, but I'm not so sure we're doing much beyond talking about it. And if you always do what you've always done, we're going to be once again saying, boy, we really thought we were doing it right this time. And those of us who are continually left out, left behind, marginalized, disregarded, will remind us all that we have to make some very significant shifts in who has the power.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marcie. That's a great point in that quote. People closest to the problem should be closer to the power. I mean, and we do put a lot of lip service to it, and we need to start moving actionable, or be actionable rather. And I think we can have go down a rabbit hole on that conversation. But I want to open it up to the audience to see if there are any questions, both virtual and in person.
Hi, thank you to Marcie and Adessou for your presentations. I guess my question is related to something that Adessou, you mentioned about sort of like the best humanitarian response is one that leads to the autonomy of people in need. And I was just wondering like what autonomy looks like in a disaster scenario, because, obviously people are going to be forced to evacuate or to be displaced. And so how would we understand autonomy under like very difficult circumstances where I guess you do have to respond to like emergency protocol and like follow authority to some degree?
Do you want me to come in, or we collect a number of questions?
You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for the question. This is a very, very great question. And I really appreciate it, because, I hope I don't have all the answer, and I believe I count on your expertise to support me providing the best of the answer that can really help and serve the people, the participants of this workshop. But let me come back and say, I like concrete example because I'm from the ground, so I don't like a lot of theory. So let us say, for instance, take a natural hazard event like droughts. It's a climate related, it's a hydrometeorological problem. And today, there is a concept, we all talk about the early warning system, which consists to anticipate this kind of event. So the timely include also anticipation. But again, in case we anticipate and we've not been able to avoid the disaster, because we can displace human beings, but we can displace goods, we can displace settlements, we can displace houses. And in case this kind of situation happen, then probably me as a DRR person, I foresee a kind of scaling up the disaster, you know. One event can lead to 3, 4, 5 different type of disaster based on the exact time we intervene and the way we intervene. So timely means that, and I say this, you know, when a hazard hits and lead to or turn to disaster, sometimes we see a lot of media talking about the situation, but nothing really happening in the life of the victims. And I think Marcie said this, we want to do something. We are talking about changing the paradigms, but still we are at the theoretical level. We are not really implementing it. Gender has got the chance to experiment this kind of situation. I can share this with you. In Niger, for example, because of the conflicts and climate-related events, a lot of women were obliged to flee from the northern part of Niger to Niamey, the capital city. And the government was aware of the situation and was really eager to help those who were obliged to flee their house. But they say, before we help you, we need to be sure that you are Nigerian. We need to make sure that you have your ID, you have your birth certificate. And most of them, you know, when it comes to displacement, you forget about this paper. You want to save your life. You want to save the life of your family, first of all. And so we talk with the government, to our members in Niger. We say, look, this is not probably the right way to proceed. And if we want to proceed this way, we know that in Niger, a lot of people don't have their birth certificates. They don't have their ID. So let us find the solution, the quickest solution, to provide them with this paper so that they can really benefit from the support you want to provide. And we have been able to support more than 500 people, women and children, who we successfully provide the birth certificate and other papers to in less than a week. And because they have those papers now, they were able to benefit from the support that the government has planned. So this is a concrete example of timely action. But this would have never happened if previously we've not planned adequately to meet the real need of the community. So you need to plan to understand the need of the community to make sure that the solution you are providing meets the expectation. And that's how your intervention becomes efficient. I don't know if I've responded to your question, but briefly, this is what I can share with you. Thank you so much.
And this is Marcie, and I will add that for people with disabilities, you know, I'll use the example currently in Pakistan. As we all know, there is horrific flooding. This is climate driven. It was predictable. It will continue. We know that. Women and girls with disabilities in Pakistan are still not being included. They're being, men and boys with disabilities are not being well included. Women and girls, hardly at all. The leaders in disability advocacy have been building relationships with humanitarian actors, with the government, with the you know, all of the stakeholders to begin to shift that predictable set of circumstances. And yet we continually find that those small community-based disability-led organizations on the ground are not gaining access to the resources that continually go to the, you know, I often refer to it as the humanitarian industrial complex. And with all due respect to my colleagues who are part of the humanitarian industrial complex, we need to make sure that those folks closest to the problem have the resources to be fully participating and if we keep giving huge sums of money to the big players, maybe there's a belief that it's trickling down. It's not. I can assure you, it's not. Case in point, our colleagues in Ukraine very recently were contacted by an organization, a large organization, humanitarian organization that was awarded huge amounts of money. And this disability-led organization on the ground was asked by them if they could refer, if people with disabilities could be referred to them, because this large organization didn't have the knowledge or capacity to serve those folks. And of course, the answer was yes. Of course, they're going to help. But the funds are going to the big humanitarian actors and the folks on the ground who are the most knowledgeable. They know the people, they know the resources, they know the community. And they are once again having to depend on the kindness of strangers and not those humanitarian systems that we've all counted on. So we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, Marcie. It's not just with humanitarian architecture, it's also in the development side, and
Absolutely.
USAID is definitely looking at how we can renew our commitment to localization, and shifting more of our leadership and ownership, decision-making, and all of that to those local people and institutions and those communities to make sure that they are at the table, their voices are heard, they are, like you say, we can't expect things to change at the higher levels, right? It's not trickling down. We really need to be at the ground and hearing from those who are actually affected by these issues. We have another question in the chat. This is to Marcie, but I will open up actually to both of you. One, they want to say thank you both for amazing presentations. Marcie stated that we are talking about making changes, but we are not seeing them yet. What are barriers to making these changes in the way we do international assistance, and how can we overcome them? And you talked about that briefly in your last response, but just a space for you to also expound on that.
I'll double down on it. Thank you. So, thank you for the kind words and for this great and important question. Again, I'm going to use Ukraine as the example, although, I understand that we're focusing primarily on climate and environmental issues for people with disabilities, and in crisis, it sort of doesn't matter because the circumstances remain the same challenges. So, and let me also say, I could be talking about this in our very current real work in Florida, Puerto Rico, our recent work in Haiti, Colombia. So this is not at all specific to what's happening in Ukraine. But the organization that we're supporting, one of the reasons that they've had a difficult time accessing the humanitarian relief funds is because they were very concerned about the reliability of the banking system. And I think we've all understandably had some concerns about the banking system in Ukraine. And that made them, because they didn't have other options, that made them ineligible for even the resources that they might otherwise have gotten. And so the Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration has supported them in providing a fiscal sponsorship so that they are able to receive funds. And it is very common that those sorts of alternatives are only done by very large organizations at a very great cost. So what we absolutely must do now is work on capacity building for those local groups to be able to take humanitarian assistance, to be able to adequately compete for it, to be able to manage it, to meet all of the unbelievably complex requirements. We can do this. We can make those changes and teach people how to play in those much larger sandboxes. And that is absolutely a priority. We also have to make sure that the use of funds that are described as being utilized to meet the needs of persons with disabilities are actually being used that way. When information is being disseminated that is not accessible or provided in ways that everyone has access to the information, not only does that create a real burden of exclusion for people with disabilities, it also means that people are far more dependent on the limited resources that are out there because they just simply can't access information that's not provided in sign language, that's not provided in Braille, that's not provided in multiple formats accessible to people who need information, easy read, plain language, etc. When we get that right for people with disabilities, and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities calls for that, when we get that right for persons with disabilities, the whole community benefits from equally effective communication access.
Thank you so much, Marcie. First of all, thanks. I can't remember the name, but thank you so much for your kind words. I hope, yeah, this time we're spending together will be helpful again. Your question is about the barriers, and I can rephrase it otherwise. I can say, why have we not implemented the Grand Bargain? You know, the Grand Bargain was like one of the powerful documents that countries spend time, money, energy, sits in a room, decide, agree to implement, and they've never implemented it. So why? You know, that's a question. And I think I can split my answer in three very short points. The first one is the political will. There is no political will. Otherwise, again, Marcie has been talking about the Ukraine war, and I want to say it in another way. We've seen how the world has been capable to mobilize resources to support Ukraine in this very short period of time. And I believe that the developing world does not look even for the half of that money per year. So where was the money all that time? That's the first question. So this is related to political will. The second point is the path of the humanitarian fund. Let us be sincere with ourselves. When we push for localization, when we push for empowering the local communities organization, is simply because if you want, the local organizations are cheaper. And cheaper means that we have a slot of money, chunk of money that can go to the solutions, which is not happening with the the international organization, I may say. It doesn't mean that the international organizations are useless. No, I'm not saying that. The international organizations are extremely important and they need to be part of the mechanism. But this should not lead to ignoring the local organization, the local communities who are the frontliners and who are dealing with the problems. You know, again, in Mali, when the conflict has started, the international organizations have taken their members and they say leave the country because of insurance, because of security. But the local communities stay there. They are still facing the challenge. So why are we not empowering them to continue the daily work on the ground? That's a question. So again, the part of the humanitarian resources, the part of the humanitarian fund need to be checked. And believe me, $1,000 that leave the BHA bank account in United States, that crossed by an international organization, probably 100 will reach the communities who are in need. So why that? That's a question. The third point I want to raise is it's also a reality that the local organizations don't have the capacity. Some of them don't have the capacity. So I think it's also important to encourage the shifting of the power from the international organization to the local organization, so that we are sure that there is a permanent capacity on the ground to tackle the problem that we will need. Finally, I think it's important to build an anticipatory mechanism to reduce the vulnerability. This said, humanitarian should not continue to work as people who assist communities. The assistance will never work. It's important to empower the community so that they can take their own development ahead. Otherwise, we will help them to sit down to wait for people to come always and feed them, and this is not sustainable. So let us find a sustainable way to solve the problem, and we should really deal with these barriers that we've mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So appreciate it. And unfortunately, we're coming to time, and I wish we'd had more time to ask, have some more questions, but want to be cognizant that folks have other things that they have to get to and other sessions that are happening. So with that, I just want to, again, thank you guys for this awesome and informative discussion. I'd like to invite Marcie and Adessou to have any brief, if you have any brief closing remarks, please share those with us. Marcie, I'll start with you.
This is Marcie. Thank you again for this opportunity. I'm hoping that this is the beginning of this really important conversation, and I welcome the opportunity to come to your tables, to bring others to your tables. We want very much for disability to be a true part of environmental justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Adessou, over to you.
Thank you so much. I will not add more because of the time. We are happy to continue the collaboration with BHA and with Marcie as well. It's a real pleasure to collaborate, and thanks for this opportunity. GNDS is available for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And I also want to thank everyone in the audience, both virtual and in person, for joining us today. It's definitely been a pleasure having you. I want to remind you, we will not be successful. We will not successfully affect climate change without inclusive approaches, as you've heard today, that are driven by the local change agents. We must be intentional and proactive in integrating these perspectives, lived experiences and knowledges as early as possible and always. Thanks again for joining, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon and a great weekend. Thank you.